Can someone truly choose their race? I mean, it's a question that really challenges some of our deepest ideas about who we are, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
So today we're taking a deep dive into transracialism, this idea of identifying with a race that's different from the one you were assigned at birth.
Yeah, and this isn't just, abstract philosophy. For this deep dive, we've looked at a really interesting mix of sources, academic papers, YouTube discussions, some fascinating Reddit threads, and some really powerful personal stories, too.
Right. Our mission today is really to unpack the complexities here, the arguments, the ethics, what it might mean for the future. We want to help you navigate these, well, pretty nuanced viewpoints without feeling overwhelmed.
Okay, so let's dive in.
Where do we start? I guess with race itself.
Exactly. When we talk about transracialism, you kind of have to start with how we understand race. And the modern scientific view, it's largely seeing race as primarily a social construct. It's moved way beyond fixed biology.
That's a huge shift, isn't it? Our research showed the Human Genome Project, for example, found there's actually more genetic variation within these so-called racial groups than between them. It sort of blows up the idea of biologically separate races.
It really does. You hear about concepts like clinal variation, traits like skin color changing gradually across geography, like a spectrum, not distinct boxes.
Right.
And non-concordant variation.
Right.
That just means different traits like skin color and blood type. They don't line up neatly into racial packages. A lot of scientists are pretty blunt now. Race is biologically indefensible.
Okay, so if it's not biology, where did our modern idea of race even come from? It sounds like it was, well, built for a reason.
That's a key point from the sources, yeah.
Yeah.
It really emerged pretty recently, historically speaking, post-16th century, with European exploration colonialism. It became a tool to categorize people, create hierarchies, and, justify things like slavery.
Yeah.
You had early classifiers like Linnaeus or Blumenbach, who were part of developing what later became scientific racism.
Right, constructed to maintain power. That makes sense. And that brings me to the difference between race and ethnicity. They often get mixed up. But the material we looked at draws a pretty clear line, doesn't it?
They do. Race is often tied more to the visible stuff, physical traits, how society sees you based on appearance. Ethnicity, though, that's more about cultural heritage, shared ancestry, history, language, customs, all that. There's actually a bit of a debate there, too. The primordialist view sees ethnicity as ancient, fixed, versus the constructivist view, where it's more socially shaped and evolving.
And how much society focuses on just appearance, lookism, some call it, and specifically skin tone, colorism, that seems to really shape perceptions. The brown paper bag clubs you read about, that's a chilling example of colorism, right? Favoring lighter skin even within the same group.
Absolutely. It shows how these harmful beauty standards get baked in. It's a striking point, suggesting lookism and colorism might be sort of foundational for how racism operates.
Wow.
And this leads us right into the personal journeys of people who identify as transracial.
Okay, so if race is mostly a social construct, what does it actually mean to identify with a different race? That's the core of transracialism. And the motivations we found, they're really diverse, aren't they? Often super personal and complex.
Totally. The journeys we saw documented, whether it's about wanting your inside feeling to match your outside, or dealing with trauma like intense racism, or sometimes just a really deep fascination with another culture, it highlights how individual identity is, even within these social categories. It's rarely simple.
It's one thing to talk theory, but the real-world examples really bring it home. We found some striking cases, like Martina Big. She's a white German model who now identifies as Black.
Right, the one with the extreme body modifications.
Yeah, skin darkening, hair changes, eye color, huge breast implants. She says she believes her roots are getting bigger and bigger. Her case definitely stirred up a lot of debate about authenticity, cultural appropriation.
For sure. And then there's Ollie London, the YouTuber, who had surgeries to look like a K-pop star, specifically Korean. That case really highlights chasing certain beauty standards, maybe unrealistic ones, and again, faced tons of accusations of cultural appropriation.
And maybe less extreme physically, but just as personal, was a Reddit user, Clyde Topan. Born white American, felt this deep connection to Japanese culture, adopted a Japanese look, hair, makeup, feeling it was their true self.
Yeah.
And you can't help but think of public figures, too, like Lil' Kim or Michael Jackson. Their appearance changes were huge public conversations about race and aesthetics for years.
Absolutely. And this brings up a really central comparison you see a lot. Transracialism versus transgender identities.
Right. Why do people make that link so often?
Well, a big part of it is that both groups often talk about wanting to align an internal sense of self with their external presentation, how they look or are perceived.
Yeah.
And, with transgender identity gaining more acceptance, some see a parallel.
Okay, that makes sense.
Though, it's important to note, our sources often point out that gender identity is increasingly understood to have a biological basis, sometimes described as a neurochemical construct rooted in the brain. It's not seen as purely social in the same way race often is.
So there's the similarity argument, but also big distinctions and criticisms, right? What are the key differences people point out?
A really crucial one is history, specifically intergenerational oppression linked to race. The sources mention things like the Canadian residential schools. That's trauma passed down through generations tied specifically to racial oppression. Gender identity doesn't typically carry that same kind of historical baggage or systemic power dynamic built over centuries.
And the privilege argument comes up a lot, especially around Rachel Dolezal. She was the white woman who presented as Black, even led an NAACP chapter.
Yeah, that was a huge case.
Critics saw her actions as basically an exercise of white privilege, the argument being a white person identifying as another race could, theoretically, just go back to being white and benefiting from that privilege, which kind of trivializes the constant discrimination people of color face.
It's interesting, though, some philosophy papers we saw actually mention that similar privilege arguments can be made in certain transgender transitions, like a trans woman potentially being able to revert to male privilege in some contexts. But for race...
there's no established path, right?
Exactly. Unlike gender transition, there aren't widely accepted medical or even social pathways for a racial transition.
And race just feels like a much more guarded category. It's so central to civil rights, to historical struggles. So self-identifying into a different race meets a lot more resistance, partly from fear of undermining that collective experience and action.
Yeah, it's definitely closely policed, as some sources put it, which leads us straight into the ethical debates and what this all means for society.
Okay, and a huge one there is cultural appropriation.
Definitely. Comes up again and again.
It's that idea of taking surface elements, clothes, hairstyles, maybe language, without understanding or respecting the history or meaning behind them, right? And often it's about power-dominant groups adopting things from marginalized cultures, turning them into trends or costumes, while the original creators might still face prejudice for those same things.
Exactly. It trivializes culture in struggle. And that ties into another concern: the potential harm to marginalized communities.
Oh, so?
Well, the worry expressed is that focusing on transracial identity as an individual choice might distract from the fight against systemic racism. It could shift the focus away from structural problems and maybe even fragment the solidarity needed to fight those larger issues.
So it's this real tension between respecting an individual's right to define themselves, their autonomy, and protecting the integrity, the history, the ongoing struggles of entire racial groups who've been marginalized. It's a tough balance.
It really is. And some thinkers push it even further, suggesting we should just abolish fixed racial categories altogether.
Get rid of them entirely.
Yeah, the idea being it could reduce division. But, as you pointed out earlier,
It's not that simple. Race is still used constantly for categorization, profiling, like in law enforcement, and it carries so much historical weight, you can't just wish it away.
precisely.
Yeah.
Which brings us to thinking about the future of identity, especially with technology and, well, just changing social ideas.
Yeah, the tech angle is fascinating, maybe a bit scary when you think about genome editing.
Right. The potential to actually alter physical traits we associate with race. It raises huge questions about what makes us who we are. Could race become fluid in a way we can't even imagine now?
And then you have AI, virtual reality, augmented reality, creating digital avatars that look however you want, racially speaking. It further blurs that line between your physical self and your perceived identity.
Some sources even talk about morphological freedom.
What's that?
Basically, the idea of a right to change your body, maybe even including racial features, as long as it doesn't harm others. It's pretty speculative, but it shows where these ideas could lead.
So with all this potential fluidity, what happens to the idea of ancestry defining race? Is that losing its power?
The sources suggest it is, yeah.
Yeah.
Several factors are weakening its hold. You get the fading of things like the one-drop rule in the U.S., the rise of multiracial identities. The U.S. Census letting people pick more than one race since 2000 was a big step.
Okay.
And then ancestry tests. They often show just how mixed most people's origins are. It creates this sense of Universal genetic mixedness, as one source put it.
Right. It makes that whole how I feel is more powerful than how I was born sentiment seem even stronger, doesn't it? It definitely changes how you think about those old family tree charts.
It really does. And speaking of different ways to think about identity, there's this academic framework we came across, the three trans categories. It's a way to conceptualize identity fluidity more broadly.
Okay, what are they?
First is trans of migration. That's moving definitively from one established category to another. Think of a medical gender transition as an example. Applied to race, it would mean really significant, ethically tricky physical changes.
Okay, what's the second?
Trans of between. This is about defining yourself in relation to two or more categories without fully fitting into just one. Multiracial identities are a good example here. And the third? Trans of beyond. This is positioning yourself completely outside the existing boxes, rejecting labels, trying to transcend categorization altogether, maybe aiming for a kind of post-racial identity.
Interesting framework. Now, while we're talking about changing ideas and demographics, the sources also warned about dangerous misinterpretations, didn't they? Specifically things like the white genocide or great replacement theories.
Yes, absolutely. It's crucial to address those, but impartially, just reporting what the sources say about them. They clearly state these are false racist narratives.
Right. Used to promote white supremacy by distorting statistics.
Exactly. They point out that while statistically, white people are a global minority, maybe around 11% of the world population, that's just a number, it doesn't automatically mean social vulnerability or loss of power. And importantly, indigenous peoples are an even smaller global minority, less than 1%. These theories just twist facts to create fear.
It's important to be clear on that. So all these shifts, these challenges, it seems like we're in a period of, what did the sources call it? The unsettling of identities.
That's the phrase, yeah. It captures this ongoing tension, this negotiation between individual choice, autonomy, and what we've always seen as biologically or socially given.
Wow. Okay, we have covered a lot of ground today. We started by really unpacking race as more of a social construct than biology, looking at its complicated history.
Then we got into the personal side, the motivations behind transracial identification, those real-world examples, and that tricky comparison with transgender identities, noting the similarities but also the really key differences.
Right. And the ethical minefield, cultural appropriation, worries about harming marginalized communities, that whole clash between individual freedom and collective identity.
We even touched on abolishing race altogether and why that's maybe not so simple.
And finally, looking ahead, how technology might reshape identity, how ancestry seems less defining now, using that three trans categories framework and addressing those dangerous misinterpretations of demographics, leading to this idea of an unsettling of identities.
Yeah, a really comprehensive look.
So where does that leave us? I mean, it's obvious there are no easy answers here. It's incredibly complex, multifaceted, and for many people, deeply personal.
Absolutely. What really stands out is the need for empathy, for open-mindedness, but also critical thinking when we approach these conversations. We have to be willing to listen to all sorts of perspectives.
Yeah, I agree. Discussing transracialism really forces you, doesn't it, to examine your own assumptions about race and identity. It pushes us to understand the sheer variety of human experience and the profound journeys people take.
It certainly does.
So maybe the thought to leave you with is this. If identity is becoming understood as both incredibly personal and deeply shaped by society, what responsibility do we have as individuals and as a society? How do we create a space where all kinds of authentic self-identification can actually thrive, especially the ones that really challenge our oldest, most ingrained boundaries?